Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to this special session. I think it's super important that we do this and that we have a briefing on our strategy, the EU strategy on the eradication of poverty. We're going to look and discuss it today with several partners, policymakers, people from the European Commission, welcome Sarah also, and also people from civil society, people experiencing poverty, and of course some of our colleagues from the European Parliament. So it's great that you are all here. Welcome. Let me briefly tell you, I think you've seen it in the program, what we're going to do today. So after my introductory remarks, Julia Walgren will give a few introductory remarks. And then we'll have a keynote message from the Vice Chair of the European Commission, Roxana Minzatu, who is responsible for this field of work. And then we will do the presentation of the recommendations of EAPN on the anti-poverty strategy, which will be done by Jessica. Yes, which will be done by Jessica. And then we have a panel with some distinguished guests. First of all, Francisco José Monte Oliveira, who is the person also speaking from experience in the panel. We have Sarah from the European Commission sharing some of the thoughts, also maybe reflections after, of course, the reflections that we've had from the Commissioner herself. And my two distinguished colleagues, Marit Toussaint and João Oliveira, who João, the last one, who is the Rapporteur for the European Parliament on this important topic. So I think it's really good that we are gathering here together. It's also really good that we continue working on an anti-poverty strategy, that we continue knowing that there's many things going on, and there's so many things going on that we barely notice that there's other fields of work that we also have to look at from the European perspective. I was just mentioning here to the colleagues, I live in the city of The Hague, which has the NATO summit right now. It was not so easy to leave the city, I must say. But we see that there's so much focus on defense and so much focus on security policies that we must make sure that we don't forget that we also have to look at social policies and especially look at security for people in our European Union, in our member states when it comes to social security, and feeling that also there is policy for them, that there is not only a policy for the physical security that we have in on our continent, but also for feeling well and knowing that you can participate and that no one is being left behind. And I think this is really important. So that's why it's so important that we are talking about this strategy, that we have this strategy, and that we are talking about it today, not just with the people here in the room. There's also a number of people online. So maybe later on in the debate, if they wish to ask a question, that's also possible from online. So, but with no further ado, let me give the floor to Julia for her introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit. Thank you so much for hosting us today. Good afternoon, dear members of the European Parliament, also the colleagues from the European Commission, esteemed colleagues, partners, friends. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here physically and online. I also like to extend my gratitude for Carlos Souzias and Francisco José Monte Oliveira, who came directly from Spain. Very kind. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. And I think what is important today is also to celebrate with great enthusiasm the political commitment to the first ever EU anti-poverty strategy, with more than 93 million people at risk of poverty in Europe. This strategy is not just a policy milestone, it's a moral imperative. At EAPN, we initiated internal discussions last year about this strategy to bring not only a vision, but also an alternative ecosystem for meaningful change. For decades, poverty has been treated as a side issue. We believe poverty is not inevitable. Poverty is a political choice. And as from 2024, the European institutions have chosen differently. This position paper is the result of a collective work from our national networks, our European members, and most importantly, from the delegates of people experiencing poverty themselves. Their voices, their stories, their courage have shaped this strategy. They are not just beneficiaries, they are co-creators of the solutions we present today. We also took time to regroup and reanalyze our positions over the past decades. We asked 3 hard questions. What was achieved, what is still missing, and what could have been done better? We've seen progress, stronger social rights, growing recognition of minimum income, and increased civil society engagement. But we also see stagnation, underfunding, and lack of binding commitments. This strategy is our response. It's our renewed commitment to do better. As we approach the next multi-financial framework, we must be clear. Words are not enough. We need resources. We need investment. Without adequate funding, we cannot meet the EU's poverty reduction targets by 2030. We cannot build resilient communities. We cannot ensure dignity for all. And let's be honest, it's unacceptable that over 93 million people live in poverty in the EU today. But we also must look beyond our borders. Poverty is a global issue. Today, we think not only of those living within the EU, but also those who are suffering from active deprivation, hunger, displacement, and economic collapse, including the people of Palestine and other in crisis zones around the world. Solidarity must be global. Our strategy must be inclusive of all humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliana. I forgot to say that there is translation. Tenemos traducción, inglés-español, so English-French, and canal número 8 and channel number 8 for those who want to use the translation. And now I would like to give the floor to Jessica. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm forgetting the most important that we have today. That is the commissioner who is presenting the strategy. We have a message from Roxana Minzatu. She will, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission. Her responsibility is for people, skills and preparedness, and she will give a brief reflection on what we can expect from her side. Thank you very much.
Dear Marit, dear colleagues, dear friends, my warm thanks to you and to the European Anti-Poverty Network for hosting this important event. Last year, 21% of the European Union population was at risk of poverty or social exclusion. That figure has been coming down in recent years, but much too slowly. And behind the numbers are real people. Families struggling to pay bills, children growing up without equal chances, older people facing their later years without dignity. Children face an even higher poverty rate, at almost 25%. That is 1 out of 4 children. And I think we can do better, and moreover, we must do better. Our eyes are now, of course, set on these Porto targets for 2030. Our ambition to lift at least 15 million out of poverty and social exclusion. But to get there, we must be much more ambitious. And that is why we are preparing a new action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights, not as a paper promise, but as a real driver for a much-needed change. To continue the path to a strong social response to the challenges, old and new, facing Europe. And at the heart of that plan will be the first ever EU anti-poverty strategy, which we will present early next year. This strategy will focus on what really matters, making sure people have what they need to live with dignity, like decent housing, access to healthcare, education, and a fair income. It is also important that this strategy will be backed by a strong budget and by new tools such as social investment or work with the international financial institutions. The strategy will look at how poverty is passed down from one generation to the next, and what can we do to break that cycle, especially for children. A stronger European child guarantee will be an essential part of this strategy. Delivering on social Europe is our shared responsibility. The EU institutions, the national, regional and local authorities, the social partners, and you, strong actors in the civil society. This is why my priority for the next few months is to consult as widely as possible. This must be a strategy that is made all across Europe, not just one that is made in Brussels. We want and we need to hear from national and local authorities. We want to hear from NGOs, and I'm especially interested in hearing from people who are experiencing or have experienced poverty. I will convene a special meeting in September for this very purpose. I do believe that those voices deserve to be heard, not just during consultations. They should be part of how to carry out, how to measure the success of our anti-poverty policies. That is how we can design better policies and deliver real results. And that is how we give meaning to the promise that we leave no one behind. Now let me thank the European Anti-Poverty Network for already promoting valuable ideas in their position paper. I especially agree that tackling poverty is like fixing a broken roof. It doesn't help to patch just one leak while ignoring the rest. We really need to look at the whole structure. Dear colleagues, we know that poverty is not a fate. It is a policy failure, and one that we can change if we work together. So I really count on your support, and I thank you.
So thank you very much, Roxana. And I think that was a very good and strong message also on her behalf, a very hopeful message for a commissioner that does have the social policy and fighting against poverty also at heart. So now we go to the recommendations from EAPN. The position paper, which has the title Towards the Eradication of Poverty, EAPN Vision and Recommendations for the EU Anti-Poverty Strategy. And I would like to give the floor to Jessica for the presentation.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well, and I hope also that online the sound is good. So my name is Jessica Mashakova. I'm a Senior Policy and Advocacy Officer at EAPN, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present our recommendations today. My presentation is going to be based on this position paper that you received here in paper, and for participants online, you can find it in the link that I sent I think this morning on Friday with a link of the event if you want to follow around. And there is a PowerPoint presentation. Ah, yes, great. Thank you for that. I hope you can see it as well online. I'm just pulling the first slide. Yep, here we are. So my presentation is going to be divided into three parts. EAPN is advocating for an ambitious, a comprehensive, and an inclusive EU anti-poverty strategy. Indeed, starting with the ambition, we see that so far, and you can see it on the little graph on the PowerPoint, the evolution of the at-risk of poverty or social exclusion rate in the EU has been stagnating. So this little graph is including only figures since 2010, thank you. But before that, we haven't seen also any improvement. This is only the quantitative data that we see here, of course, and the ROP indicator can also be improved. This is something that we are touching upon in our paper, but what we see so far is that effects of EU initiatives has been limited in terms of numbers. Also, regarding the ROP, this graph and these statistics only include official methodology, but do not include the experience of what we call the missing poor, so people who are hard to reach when it comes to support, inclusion in statistics, and so on. So to mention, for instance, undocumented people, homeless people, Roma people, racialized people, people in detention, and so on. You can find a list in our position paper, actually. So not only the statistics are stagnating, but also they do not reflect the extent of the situation. And this is for the quantitative analysis. When it comes to the qualitative analysis, what we hear from EAPN members and people experiencing poverty, working with them, is that hardship is, of course, still there, but also forms of poverty are more and more complex. We know about the housing crisis, the energy crisis, the impact of inflation, and so on and so forth, which is adding the more it goes and the less we take policy initiative to address them. It depends. Effects of poverty and hardship experienced by people in poverty. In the position paper, we make reference to the Poverty Watch, which is EAPN flagship publication, where you can see more information about this qualitative analysis of poverty. Voilà. Second, also starting point that we took to develop this position paper is the lack of current progress on the Porto targets on poverty reduction. So, as it was explained in the video message of EVP Minzatu, the EU has committed to reduce poverty by at least 15 million people by 2030, including at least 5 million children. This commitment is linked to the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. However, in practice, only 1.6 million people have been, poverty has only declined by 1.6 million people between 2019 and 2023. And this statistics is taken from the Joint Employment Report of the European Commission, which is a yearly publication of the Commission in the context of the European semester. And this Joint Employment Report expresses worries about the feasibility of these targets to be reached by 2030. EAPN analysis is not that this target is too hard to reach because it's impossible in terms of figure. Our analysis and our position is that this target is lacking of ambition from the start, and therefore we are not putting in place sufficiently enough ambitious tools to reach it. And this is why in our analysis we think that the EU hasn't reached yet any concrete results. And in that context, the EU anti-poverty strategy is an opportunity to reverse this trend. We advocate for a totally different approach. And I don't know if the slide, oops. We are advocating for a totally different approach. We are actually asking the Commission to take the commitment to eradicate and not only to alleviate poverty. What happened so far, for instance, in the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan or in the Lisbon Strategy, in the EU 2020 Strategy, these tools have been put in place to manage poverty and not to eradicate poverty. It doesn't mean that the EU anti-poverty strategy is going to eradicate poverty within 4 or 5 years. It means that if we take this commitment, this political commitment to work towards the eradication of poverty, the Commission, the EU overall will be able to put in place a sufficient tool, to dedicate sufficient resources, and to have a concrete plan to work toward the eradication of poverty. Concretely, what we are asking for in terms of targets is based on the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, number 1, which asked member parties to eradicate extreme form of poverty by 2030 and to reduce all forms of poverty by 50% by 2030. And we think that this goal of reducing poverty by 50% by 2030 is the first step toward eradication. What we are also advocating for is a comprehensive definition of poverty, reflecting the experience of people living in poverty, and I will come back to that point later. A commitment as well to improve poverty measurement. So as I was mentioning before, the ROP methodology has limitations. We think the anti-poverty strategy is the opportunity to put people together, be it academics, statisticians, policymakers, people experiencing poverty, to think about how to improve this methodology and how to capture better the reality of of poverty, including from an intersectional perspective. We also advocate to stem away from the competitiveness framework and the competitiveness I've lost the word, paradigm when it comes to fighting poverty. So far, initiatives like EU 2020 Lisbon Strategy were actually there to promote growth and employment, and reducing poverty was a kind of support tool to get more growth and better competitiveness. We think poverty is first and foremost a rule of law, a democracy, and fundamental rights issues, touching upon human dignity, participation in society, and so on and so forth. And we are asking the Commission to take into consideration and to use Article 2 of the Treaty of the EU as a legal basis, and not only focusing on Article 3 of the Treaty of the EU, which says that basically the EU should lead to competitive growth, if I'm not mistaken, but also social inclusion. We need a broader framework for that. And our last recommendation on that point is shifting the narrative about people living in poverty, because discrimination, stigmatization of people living in poverty is part of the poverty cycle, is one of the root causes of poverty, and we need clear tools and a clear strategy to shift the narrative, be it from the media, from decision makers, and so on. And at a time where the far right and fascism are more and more institutionalized, have been a reality for many people for many years, but are more and more institutionalized since the EU elections. It's urgent to address and to tackle discourses dismissing, reducing, and tackling the human dignity of people living in poverty from policymakers. Second aspect, a comprehensive strategy. We, as EAPN, we have been asking for an EU anti-poverty strategy since the network was created in 1990, 35 years ago. Because so far, and it didn't happen so far, EU 2020, the Lisbon Strategy, the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan have approached poverty, but in an incomplete way. With a focus on employment and overlooking broader social and structural factors. I was mentioning earlier the definition of poverty. We are not advocating for a EU-wide definition of poverty, because that would be opening a Pandora box. However, we advocate for a broader understanding of poverty. EAPN has the following working definition or understanding. Which is, first of all, poverty as a fundamental rights violation affecting human dignity and the right to equality and non-discrimination. Second aspect, more and more than poverty is much more than material deprivation. It also involves social, psychological, and political deprivation. And a third aspect is that poverty is having its roots in systemic and structural injustice. Mentioning, for instance, capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism, racism, ableism, heteronormativity, and so on and so forth. So for us, this is not only an issue of addressing a socio-economic issue. This is about addressing the system as a whole and how the system can contribute to eradicate poverty. In the position paper, there is a draw summarizing basically our vision. We do not see the EU anti-poverty strategy as a single, the list of priorities, let's say, for instance. We think it should be also equipped with a strong basis, such as participation of people experiencing poverty, which is at the top. I don't know if you can really see it on the slide. Participation of people experiencing poverty as one of the pillars. This commitment that I was mentioning earlier on from alleviation to eradication. We also came up with a list of 12 priorities. I will come back to them in my next slide. But we also think that the anti-poverty strategy should be adequately funded through the multi-annual financial framework, for instance, but also through cohesion with other policy strands of the EU. And I would like to take in particular the example of the European semester, which is the annual policy cycle of the European Commission on fiscal budgetary social policies. EAPN members are coming up every year with the assessment of the European semester in their country. And this is not surprising to say that the European semester is actually used to promote austerity policies. You cannot have a European semester promoting austerity policies and an EU anti-poverty strategy co-living together. One is going to cancel the other, and unfortunately we know that austerity policies are going to dismiss any efforts to eradicate poverty. So in our position paper we also included recommendations to turn the European semester to a social semester actually. So a social semester being at the service of the anti-poverty strategy and not the other way around. We mentioned in the introduction local and national authorities. We think the EU by itself will not eradicate poverty alone. It requires multi-governance and the involvement of many decision-making levels. So we think that the anti-poverty strategy is actually the opportunity to strengthen and to promote local and national anti-poverty strategies. And we also call on the Commission to include EU candidate countries in the various negotiation process, accession process, of the European Union, in funding mechanism, and so on. I'm a bit quick on that one because we could dedicate an event to each of these issues, so bear with me. I would like to move to the 12 priorities that we put together in the paper. As a first, the first part of these priorities are actually based on the European Pillar of Social Rights. This year, the action plan of the EPSR is going to be renewed. So the anti-poverty strategy and this action plan are supposed to work together. Actually, this anti-poverty strategy will be the opportunity to step up what already exists in the European Pillar of Social Rights. And in the paper, in the 5 first priorities, we identified which principles of the EPSR could be used as a starting point for the anti-poverty strategy and how they can be improved in the implementation. I will not go through each of them, but just to spend a bit more time on priority 1, for instance, on minimum income, which is one of the advocacy priorities of EAPN. We advocate as a crucial tool to eradicate poverty for a right to a minimum income, which is adequate, accessible, and also enabling, meaning that this is a right and not only a social support tool or whatever it can be called at national level. We advocate for this minimum level, minimum income to be way beyond the poverty threshold to ensure that each person living in the EU, being resident, non-EU citizens, undocumented, have the minimum income to live in dignity. The second part of our priorities, so from priorities 6 to 12, are going beyond the European Pillar of Social Rights and therefore beyond the competencies of the Employment Committee of the European Parliament, of DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission, because we think we need to broaden the scope of what we understand as poverty, as I was mentioning before. And this is why we are also advocating for the legal recognition of socioeconomic discrimination as one of the many tools to work toward the eradication of poverty. Actions to protect migrants, asylum seekers, and undocumented people, especially in the context of the Migration and Asylum Pact, which will put migrants, asylum seekers, and undocumented people in even more danger. The right to an healthy and affordable food, a just transition in the context of tackling climate change, ensuring the digital rights of people living in poverty in the context of always increasing digitalization of social services, for instance. We published a report a year ago actually showing that digitalization contributes actually to further exclude people living in poverty. We are also calling to urgently address criminalization of poverty in the EU, be it criminalization of homeless people, criminalization of undocumented people, of sex work, and so on and so forth. And our last priority, protecting civil society organizations and activists. This is a general call, but we adjusted it to anti-poverty activists in our paper. The situation is extremely worrying, be it at national or European level, and without civil society organizations, without activists, and without without them, there's no way we can go toward the eradication of poverty. And my last point, which is about participation of people living in poverty, EAPN believes that no legal policy or budgetary initiative should be undertaken without involving impacted communities. And in that context, specific context of the anti-poverty strategy, people experiencing poverty must be involved at all stages of the EU anti-poverty strategy. We know that direct democracy is more and more widespread in EU institutions, which is great. However, with EAPN, we advocate for quality over quantity, let's say. We are advocating for a meaningful participation of people experiencing poverty, in the sense that we would like to avoid that the experience of impacted communities is not properly reflected in the final policy product. And for that, to avoid this extractivist or tokenist approach, we need a methodology, a solid methodology, and our position paper is giving some pointers in that direction. Our first recommendation is to create a committee of people experiencing poverty, a PEP committee, which will be involved in all stages of the EU anti-poverty strategy. A clear methodology to ensure the meaningful participation of people experiencing poverty, and to give an example, compensating financially the time spent by people experiencing poverty when they share the experience with policymakers, and to ensure safeguards to avoid an extractivist approach of the experience of people living in poverty. So in a nutshell, and as it was mentioned by Juliana at the beginning, eradicating poverty is a political choice. We see it with defense. Excluding defense spending from the calculation of national deficit was made because of a political choice. We think it could be the same with poverty, with social investments, and so on. And the first ever EU anti-poverty strategy is the opportunity to work towards poverty eradication. Also, the EU should come up with an ambitious, comprehensive, rights-based and inclusive strategy, and going beyond the European Pillar of Social Rights. This is really our message today and the focus of the roundtable right after. We cannot only focus on socio-economic and employment issues alone. And last but not least, participation of people experiencing poverty is crucial. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask so. Otherwise, you have my contact if you have any questions in written. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for this explanation, and I think also very good highlights of your report, which will help us in the work that we are doing in the future. And already in the present, of course. So now let me start by introducing again our panel. The overarching question for the panel is, how can we adopt a comprehensive approach to eradicating poverty that goes beyond social economic factors? We have 4 speakers. Each speaker will have one leading question, and then they will have approximately 5 minutes to respond. And after that, we will open the floor also for the participants here to ask questions, and maybe also those that are participating online. So first, I would like to introduce my colleague, João Oliveira, from the left. He's a member of the European Parliament, and he is our rapporteur for the EU anti-poverty strategy. João, as a rapporteur for the EU anti-poverty strategy, how will you ensure that the upcoming European Parliament report adopts a comprehensive approach to eradicating poverty, and one that goes beyond socio-economic factors to also address structural, environmental, and systemic dimensions? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marit. Good afternoon to all, and a special salute to Marit Maij for organizing this important event in which we have the room to discuss such an important issue as the European Union anti-poverty strategy. The answer to your question implies an approach to poverty, refusing poverty as a natural or inevitable social phenomenon, but considering it as a violation of human rights, as with deep roots on inequalities and discriminations, as the Commissioner said, a political failure in order to address people's issues, considering their human rights. Whenever we hear about the European social standards, we need to demand political correspondence. If we keep hearing about the European social standards, especially comparing to other places of the world in which those social standards are not that good, we need to demand consequences, political consequences from those statements. So the draft report presents some guidelines, at least by now as a draft report, with the size of 6,000 characters of size. We cannot do much more than building the skeleton of what we want to be, what we want the European Parliament to report to be. We start from that consideration that poverty needs to be addressed as a human rights violation, and considering that those rights, political, economical, social and cultural rights, must be fully respected as they are universal, indivisible, interdependent and interrelated, and should be at the core of anti-poverty policies. And of course, we need to address poverty in a comprehensive manner, trying to eradicate it, with the aim of eradicating. I would say that placing the right goals and finding the effective tools to achieve those goals are the most challenging task we have when we address the anti-poverty strategy. Because I believe we need to face the goal of eradicating poverty, not only alleviating it, and we need to find the right tools in order to fight poverty wherever there is poverty already, but also to prevent poverty, with policies that go to the economical and social roots of poverty in all those dimensions. We place the goal of eradicating poverty by 2035 at the latest. We believe it's absolutely fundamental to have a proper coordination between the EU level, but also the national and regional level of fighting poverty, because the proper coordination is absolutely essential to the strategy to be effective. We believe we need a comprehensive and integrated approach to anti-poverty policies and measures, and the goal of eradicating poverty as a cross-cutting criteria on sectorial policies. We cannot discuss energy issues, environmental issues, employment issues, considering only the sectorial aspects of each one of those policies. We need also to ask in which way some decision at some sectorial policy can contribute to eradicate poverty. And we need to have that cross-cutting approach on eradicating poverty. And we believe it's absolutely essential to ensure participation by people experiencing poverty in defining, implementing and evaluating policies that affect them in an appropriate, effective and transparent manner. And we also make a stand about what we believe it can be effective on that goal. To conclude, I would only want to address very briefly two issues. One of them is which place of priority does anti-poverty strategy needs to take in European Union strategic guidelines? We hear about competitiveness, we hear about preparedness, we hear about security and defense, and by the 10th, at the 10th place, we hear about something about social inequalities and social standards. I believe we need to bring the anti-poverty strategy to the first place of priorities to address by the European Union, especially considering the failure of previous policies and goals that were established. If we cannot manage to put anti-poverty strategy in the first place of priorities, we will never be at least close to the goals we are discussing now. And related to this is the other question about the resources. I'm doing like this, but I'm not talking only about money, because I believe we need to put science, technology, productive capacities, social instruments. We need to mobilize also, of course, money to fight poverty. And I believe that's an issue we'll have to discuss very, very clearly, because we cannot only stand by finding some tools of financing the anti-poverty strategy. We need to allocate the financial means that correspond to the aim of the goal we are standing to eradicate poverty. We need to do that, especially at the MFF level, with this discussion of the next MFF for 2028, 2034. But we need to discuss it also right away with the next budget of the European Union, and with the referral point that the next year's European Union budget can point out from now.
Yes, thank you very much, João. I think that's a very important point. I think also the Commissioner mentioned that there has to be a budget and tools with the strategy. Otherwise, it's a nice piece of paper, but an empty box. Let's go to our second speaker in this panel discussion, our dear colleague Marit Toussaint from the Greens, who is not only the vice chair of the Intergroup of Fighting Poverty, but who is also the mother of this intergroup. She's the one who initiated this intergroup, and I think it's really great that we have it here in this parliament. For you, the following question, Marie, as a co-chair of the Intergroup Against Poverty, and as a member of the parliamentary committees on Envy, on monetary affairs, taxation and housing, how do you ensure that a strong anti-poverty perspective is integrated across your diverse areas of work? The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Marit. And thanks also for welcoming this very important moment. I don't know if I can call that workshop, because we're going into the really detail and what to do. And thanks a lot also to Juliana, Jessica, and Kaina, and all the rest of the EAPN team for this huge work that I think was really beneficial. And I guess João agrees that it feeds his report. And I also want to thank all of you, because we're a lot of people here today, and I'm quite glad. So thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for being with us as well. After this thanks, just to answer Marit's, but João has already said quite some stuff about this cross-cutting need to work. But I wanted also to, because the speech we had and we saw from Roxana Minzatu, from the Commissioner, was quite great. It was quite enthusiastic, and a lot of reaffirmation of the political will. So if what she says is what we got in the end, I think it's going to be a very important step. And that our role here is to ensure that this is indeed, that what we get practically is indeed at this level of ambition. I just, and it's related to the question, don't worry, Marit, but I just wanted to point out 3 different things reacting to her comments. Because she underlined, and she said it in a very, I think, crucial way, but she underlined the need for the participation of people experiencing poverty in not only the construction, the reduction, but also the monitoring somehow, the implementation of the anti-poverty strategy. And what I want to say, and so it's also linked with the question Marit had for me, is that we don't only need this participation when it comes to anti-poverty actions, but we need it in every single area of policymaking of the European Union, even though it's, of course, really difficult because it's already difficult to include citizens in our everyday work. So going far is even more difficult, but we absolutely need to do it. And I think this is something that the Intergroup has committed to, and I really want to thank not only Marit, but all the colleagues, because we're really committed to that. But when we address quality jobs, for instance, and Roxana Minzatu has planned to publish at the same moment of the anti-poverty strategy a roadmap for quality jobs, we need the participation of people experiencing poverty, because of course it's harder for them to get a quality job, to get a job even, but to get a quality job than for any others. When we talk about artificial intelligence, which is a lot of work in the European institutions right now, of course we need the participation. And I could go on and on, so I will stop not to be too long. But this is something that I want also to put on the table, and I think that's also what was in the paper that Jessica brilliantly presented a bit sooner. The second thing is that, yes, we need to have a cross-cutting approach of poverty in all the decisions we're making. This is linked to the first point, right? But then we need to ensure that when we talk about industry, environment, housing, all the committees I'm working on that Marit addressed, we do pay attention to the issue of poverty, injustices, inequalities, and human dignity. That is at the core, I think, of what we try to do here. To take one example, I sit in the Environment Committee. Well, we perfectly know that there is environmental injustice, that there is even environmental racism that is affected, for instance, Roma and travelers, which is shortening the lives of the poorest. And we know that there is a significant gap between the life expectancy of the richest and the poorest. And of course, the access to air, to water, to soil that are in a healthy space is absolutely key. So we need to ensure that as well. In the Industry Committee, then of course, the industrial jobs that will be created needs to be accessible also for people experiencing poverty. So I gave more examples, but just to tell you. And for that, and that would be the third point, Roxana Minzatu talked about some tools. And I think that we do have more tools than she quoted in EAPN's report, and maybe we can even build some more. The first tool, I believe, is really to get binding targets about eradicating poverty. And I think this is important that we have binding targets at European level, but also at national level, and that we can hold governments accountable and the EU accountable for reaching out to them. This is the only way to ensure that policies will really be developed and not only an empty box. Then we need a social mainstreaming tool to be applied to all policies, or else it won't work and we won't have this cross-cutting approach. In the committees I have, it's quite difficult because, to be really transparent with you, we barely have social impacts when it comes to legislative proposals from the Commission. So the legislative proposals that come up, they don't really address the impact on exclusion and risk of poverty. They don't ensure that at some point there is a participation of people experiencing poverty, neither in the making of the law or in the implementation of the law and what it puts on the table. We even sometimes have, and this is what's happening at the moment, restrictions on the participation of people. They want to go faster, especially to develop some projects. And of course, we can say that the EU is in a state of emergency. I would talk about climate emergency, for instance. Others would talk about, I don't know, competitive emergencies. But whatever the emergency, a society needs to move with everyone, and not only with like the fastest, only those who can follow, you know? And this is a matter for me of civilization. And this is really a question that the EU needs to ask itself. If we were based on human dignity, which is the funding, the principle of the European Union, that we must ensure that this stays at the same time our goal and the path we apply.
Yes, thank you very much, Marie. I think those are some very good reflections, and I was still writing down society needs to move with everyone. I think that's a very good reflection that we need maybe on all our policies and not just on the anti-poverty strategy. Which brings me to the third speaker in our panel, that is Sarah Shinadzi. She's the team lead for at the Director General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion in the European Parliament. Excuse me, in the European Commission. And for you, the question, how will the Commission ensure that the first ever anti-poverty strategy adopts a more comprehensive and integrated approach than the initiatives that were taken so far?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this super interesting discussion on how to take a systemic approach and how to have this comprehensive approach on the anti-poverty strategy. As you said, I'm part of the drafting team on the strategy, so it's very useful to be here and also to have of your events, which I attend regularly. Our mandate is set in the political guidelines, right? The Commission political guidelines 2024-2029. They are the ones that say that the Commission will put forward the EU's first ever anti-poverty strategy, and they also point to a short description of what the strategy will be about. They say that it should help people getting access to essential protections and essential services, and it also says that it needs to address the root causes of poverty. So if we speak of addressing the root causes of poverty, by definition, we need to do more than just, in quotation marks, because it's no small endeavor, but just helping those who are already in poverty. We need to have a critical look at what has led to the situation in order to be able to help prevent it in the future. So just to illustrate that, for instance, I work mainly on minimum income policies. You can have the most beautifully designed minimum income policy that respects each line of the council recommendation we put forward in 2020, that was agreed in 2023, that can help, of course, alleviating people from poverty, that can help break the intergenerational transmission of poverty, but that alone will never end poverty. So this is why the first point I wanted to make is that the political guidelines, in my view, do call for taking a systemic approach and the comprehensive approach that we've been discussing so far. The second point I wanted to make is that this is not completely new. So for instance, when we look at the so-called green policies of the EU, I have in mind the 2020 Water Quality Recast Directive, the 2023 Commission recommendation on energy poverty. In 2024, I believe there was a recast directive on urban water or urban waste treatment, 2025 transport poverty recommendation. In all of these initiatives, there are some provisions to identify which groups have difficulties in accessing the essential services and also to support them. So here it's not completely new, this idea of mainstreaming the needs of vulnerable groups. If I think of digital policies, for instance, there's the Digital Skills and Job Coalition, the 2030 Digital Compass that support the idea of digital literacy, digital inclusivity. Spoke about AI. The AI Act has some provisions that say that a specific approach or like a specific treatment should be given when it comes to social benefits or social services. There's also a recital that says that, if I remember correctly, using AI should not infringe fundamental rights such as access to social protection or human dignity. So some considerations have already been taken in that area as well. Then you were mentioning, of course, the EU's economic policies. Here, of course, we have in mind the economic governance review. I would mention that it does include as an objective social and economic resilience. It refers to the European Pillar of Social Rights, and this is one of the criteria that can be used to extend these adjustment periods. When it comes to financial policies, there's the Payment Accounts Directive that aims to facilitate access to basic payments accounts for everybody who needs it. In terms of consumer policies, there's the recast Consumer Directive in 2023 that had some measures to prevent over-indebtedness, and I'll stop here, but you got the point. This is not completely new, and there has been some efforts in what has been called until now, yes, mainly mainstreaming the needs of the most vulnerable. I think what we have an opportunity to do here with the anti-poverty strategy is first to give a coherent approach to this and to have a joint message on what we're trying to achieve with all of these sporadic little, not so little, but all these sporadic initiatives, but also, of course, to step up these efforts and to kind of drive more efforts with taking the systemic approach or comprehensive approach or however we call it. So right now we are in consultation phase, as the EVP mentioned. We hope to launch the open public consultation before the summer, and so we'll be very much looking forward to reading all your suggestions on how to take this comprehensive and systemic approach in particular. And maybe one last point I wanted to make today is that, of course, it's very, very important that the EU takes this systemic approach, but maybe equally or more important is that the national and the local stakeholders do it as well, right? Because they're at the forefront of the fight against poverty. And a few years ago, the Commission had adopted a communication on distributional impact assessment, and this is some guidance to support national authorities in taking into account the needs of the most vulnerable across policy areas. I know the name of the initiative is not the most straightforward, but that was the intention behind it. That does not mean that we can do more, but again, in the consultation, please don't hesitate to give us ideas of also not only what we can do at EU level to take the systemic approach, but also how we can further support national and local authorities in taking that approach themselves. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think with the list of initiatives that you already mentioned that are taking place, probably the most important is to make sure what João said in the beginning is to make it comprehensive and make it something that is in the end beneficial for everyone, and especially for people experiencing poverty themselves or having experienced poverty themselves. And the most important, what we have said today, is also to listen to them and to learn what their experience is, and especially what their recommendations are. And this brings me to the fourth speaker on our panel, Francisco José Monteoliva. I understand you understand English, but you will speak in Spanish? Yes. So those of you who do not understand Spanish, on number 8, we can listen to your recommendations. And well, the question to you is, what would you recommend? What do you think is the most important that we need in this strategy?
I want to thank everybody to the invitation to this. And there has been said a lot of people say a lot of things to eradicate the poverty, but I want to include 2 main things that are very, very important. The homeless people has been increased time to time, and that is a problem. That is a social poverty problem. That is a security poverty. That's a hard problem to the society. And there is another problem which has to say something to say with the home. I mean, when you have a good house to live, you have a good quality to live. And I mean, we must fight to get that the poverty has to say something with the house problem, because there is a hard problem with that, you know, the rents, and that. That's the only say that I want to know. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you are right. Homelessness is a problem that is unfortunately increasing a lot. We have recently seen, for example, in my country, in the Netherlands, that there's an increasing number of children that are also homeless, that are sleeping with their parents, often in apartment buildings, in the halls or in the staircases, or with their parents maybe in a car that they still own. And these situations are, of course, well, I think something that we should not only avoid, but make sure that they do not take place, because it brings people at such a bad start of their life, not just for the children, but also the stress that it brings to the parents, knowing that they cannot bring to the children what they want to bring to their children. Thank you very much for your introductions in the panel. We now have about 15 minutes for discussion, questions, remarks from people here in the room, and maybe also from some people online if they want to ask questions. If you want to ask a question, please state your name and say who the question is addressed to, and also make sure that you don't make very long statements when you ask the question. So who can I give the floor first? Yes, please.
Hello, thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this event. My name is Cristiana Stoyanova. I'm from Eurochild. I'm a policy and advocacy officer on child poverty, and I'm from Bulgaria. Bulgaria this year, according to Eurostat, has the highest child poverty rate at 35%. But if you look at the data, it's actually that 80% of the Roma children are experiencing, they're more vulnerable to become poor or are experiencing poverty. So my question has to do with data gathering, and Bulgaria is not collecting disaggregated data. So also their interventions in terms of the European Child Guarantee are not targeted. And we just analyzed 15 member states' country biannual reports, which will be produced later this week. And we saw that most countries commit to Roma children, for example, but not all of them are doing targeted interventions. So my question is towards Sarah, but anyone in the panel can join. Like, what can we do to kind of enforce member states to collect disaggregated data, which will improve the interventions, the targeted interventions? Maybe it should be binding targets, I don't know, but like, what are your ideas on the topic? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think there's a lot of areas in which we would like a lot more disaggregated data. So it's very important in the context of child poverty, but also in so many different areas to, you know, for the poverty indicator of the action plan, but also beyond. I won't be able to reply to you in terms of how we can support, because I would need to discuss it with ESTAT colleagues. But for sure, this is something that's on our mind and that we push for, and that we, you know, it's a matter of national capacity very often. So you see the countries who do not collect those data are often those who do not have the resources to do so, right? So, but I won't comment here on what we can further do about it, because I wouldn't be able to, but well noted.
I think Marie also wants to reflect on this question, please.
Yes, thank you. I think with Jessica, it's the second time in a row that we're organizing something on poverty and that people ask us about data gathering. So that can be a tricky question, but yours was not so tricky. And I think we've made with Juliana an op-ed also in last March, to say, of course, we have issues on gathering of data on children, but also of women, and we barely make it to understand what they live. And this is, we don't have enough disaggregated data, but we also have a lot of work to do in terms of quality of data. Because I think, as it has been shown by different studies, but especially the one by Oxford and the First World Movement, poverty is not only about numbers, it's not only about money, it's also about emotions, sufferings, and all these kind of things. And for this, we need to have more data. But from what I get, the Commission then says that they would be great if we help them getting this data. So that we can do together, and also pushing the member states to, ensure that we do have this data. But I wanted also to take it back, because this question on Roma in Bulgaria, I think it's quite important. And we've just witnessed a forced eviction. Unfortunately, it's not the first one, of 200 Roma people with no solution, and despite a court order a few weeks ago. So the Intergroup has taken side, and I know that a lot of other organizations, but also parliamentarians have called on the Bulgarian government to act, and we absolutely need that. And yeah, I wanted to take, so thanks a lot, because then I can tell that publicly as well. And last thing I want to say is that, and this time to the Commission, although it's not you that I'm pointing at personally, but if we want to fight against discrimination and poverty, we need to have data, but we also need to have commitments. And the withdrawal of the anti-discrimination strategy is, in this context, a real step backwards. And we wanted to change a little bit the text of this anti-discrimination directive, because we needed to update it and also to include socioeconomic discrimination in it. But we didn't want it to be withdrawn, and this won't help us at all, because of course, once we have goals, political goals, a directive on discrimination, then it also pushes the states and the organizations and so on to act and to gather the data in order to fight discrimination. So we really need to get this directive back.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kahina. I work with Jessica at EAPN, and I also wanted to input in the answer on data collection. I think here is the perfect example of what is the difference between structural and systemic, because you can have good policy to have data collection, but if at the same time the authorities that are supposed to implement those data collection are also the authorities that are excluding you, that are criminalizing you and your community, it's hard to build a trust relation between the minorities and the government that is supposed to collect those data. So I think here it's again the perfect, like I said, the perfect example of why data collection should not be understood in and of itself, but to which purpose it should serve. There are principles of data collection. There is many research that has been done, how to build a data collection set, how to create those categories, how to make sure that it's anonymized, and make sure that the communities have access throughout the process. So I can refer you to some of the research that has been done to that extent, made by the Migration Policy Group and the Open Society Foundation, but not only. Many minority-led organizations have worked on data collection methodology, but we are living in a situation where minorities are more and more criminalized and stigmatized, and to only look at the policy side of data collection, it's only going to make a semi-solution to a bigger problem.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, another question. Please go ahead. Afterwards.
Hello, I'm Sumaira Al-Karcheshma. Thank you very much for this very interesting for all the interesting inputs. I'm a PhD student at the University of Antwerp, and my work focuses on poverty in the EU and the role of the EU in poverty reduction. I very much welcome the recommendations presented by Jessica, but I wanted to ask something about the meaningful participation of those with poverty experiences. I like that you said meaningful participation. I was wondering if there are also already recommendations that you have about how we can create a safe and accessible space for those with lived poverty experiences, so that we don't actually contribute to so that we don't have a negative impact on the narratives about people in poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. And it's exactly what we're trying to develop with EAPN as well within our organization as a practice, and also to promote at institutional level. So far in our what we call our participation and development work at EAPN, so our work with impacted communities, with people experiencing poverty. In the position paper, we focused on the methodology, on what it means to have a meaningful participation. In terms of safe space, I would say that, first of all, starting with the basis of ensuring that the contribution is going to be taken into account in the final product, in the final policy product, not as a promise, but as a visible result. So here I'm talking policy side, not individual side, is the first step. I mentioned briefly the issue of compensating the time as well of people experiencing poverty. And I already forgot what was the end of my reasoning, and I'm sorry for that. Sorry, I have a mind blank. But overall, what I wanted to conclude is that these recommendations in the paper is the start of a process also for us to also improve our practices. And so far, this is a start of reflection. So in the paper, you can see some recommendations, but of course, it's something that we aim also to develop further, and especially the question of a safer space that we didn't explore so far in details. This is a work in progress. So this is only the beginning of a response that we have, and we hope to come up with something more in the coming years.
You want to compliment? Yeah.
Yes, just to complement, and Fernando our participation development officer can complement as well. And I think as well from a EAPN side, it's very important that we accommodate needs. There is no safe space if you don't accommodate what the needs of the people are. And it can come from the very complex example of interpretation, accommodating resources, but it also creates a methodology that you explicitly say what the time is used for. What is expertise is used for. Otherwise, it's a extractivism approach or tokenized approach that you just do a check-the-box exercise and there is no result with the participation of people. So for us, it's really to ensure that the process is clear, but what the process is for is also very, very streamlined and highlighted throughout the process. I don't know if Fernando wants to complement?
Or Francisco?
I think you just said most of the things that I was about to say. Pardon. I think, again, it's I was just about to touch base about the fact that we need to take into account the real needs of the people we are involving into the table. And some example, like for example, we don't take into account the translations for needs of people experiencing poverty, and we just put them in the same table like here, and we take for granted that everyone speaks English because we are in the process bubble, and that's of course. And also something that maybe I could add on that is the regional differences. We know, and if we are talking about poverty, and you bring some people from Italy, people experiencing poverty in Italy, for example, who are facing more challenge on housing, and someone probably from Norway, there might have different needs. So I think what again here was said, the assessment in terms of what actually the contribution that these people that are bringing in would be useful for. I think that's some of the aspects that I need to take into account when we speak about meaningful participation of people experiencing poverty.
Do you want to add something, Francisco? No? Okay, maybe the lady in the back? Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Anna Ferro from the European Roma Grassroots Organizations Network, ERGO Network. First of all, a number of points that I also wanted to raise were luckily raised, including the absolute need for disaggregated data, because we so often speak about poverty, but it's being reduced, it's not being reduced, and we're looking at statistics, and we're not looking at how it impacts specific groups, and the results are not the same. Over 80% of Roma experience poverty in Europe, and in some countries like Italy or Greece, over 98%. That is virtually every single person of Roma origin. Additionally, most often in Europe, we speak about relative poverty having successfully eradicated absolute poverty, except we haven't successfully eradicated it for everybody. There are some key groups, for example, people experiencing homelessness, and the Roma, who still experience absolute poverty, which is defined as living on less than $1 or €1 a day. Different measures. So the need to capture these different realities of different groups, including based on ethnic background, is absolutely paramount for us, and such is the need for disaggregated data with all the caveats that were mentioned. But this leads to the bigger question that Kahina was also hinting at, which is, why do we want disaggregated data? Why do we care about this? Well, we care about this because some groups have a different experience. Those groups are being discriminated, and there's nowhere near enough talk about discrimination in the talk about anti-poverty. With all due respect, in the EP report, there are very few mentions to discrimination. Hopefully, that will not be the case in the proposal that comes from the Commission, specifically because now we have a European Commission Executive Vice President who is responsible for social policies as well as for equality. Why did we have to wait for a structural, happy serendipitous coincidence like this? I don't know, because equality and social inclusion should always have gone hand in hand. And in the same way, poverty and discrimination are a vicious circle that perpetuate each other. And specifically for us, obviously, racism, there is a new anti-racism plan being adopted at EU level right now, and also anti-gypsyism, which is already a priority of the EU Roma framework, part of the Union of Equality. So we talked about policy coherence. Can we make sure that the Union of Equality is not forgotten in the upcoming EU anti-poverty strategy, especially as some of the strategies in the Union of Equalities, for instance, the EU Roma framework, have a target on reducing Roma poverty with indicators, which is quantified. And what we have seen with the child guarantee, and Christiana was mentioning, was that although Roma children were a target group at EU level, at national level, many member states said, oh, we're not going to deal with Roma children because we have the Roma framework. This is not what we want to see happening with the anti-poverty strategy. We don't want to hear we're not mentioning the Roma in it, or other minorities, or other vulnerable groups, because we have specific strategies for them, because those strategies need to be mainstream in the anti-poverty strategy and the other way around. That is also policy coherence that needs to happen. And then to conclude with the last point on participation, we also obviously want to see that participation is diverse, is rich, and reinforces the fact that people in poverty are not a box, or rather, they are a box full of many different people coming on from all walks of life, of all shapes and sizes. We're talking about everybody speaking English. Some of them only speak Romanes. Some of them don't know how to read or write. Let's make sure that those voices are heard as well. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And I see this is a similar comment and a question as we have from Jonathan Lee from the European Roma Rights Center online, which refers to the data that you also mentioned, that 80% of the population of Roma people live in poverty, and that there is a anti-Gypsyism sentiment also in our societies. So I think these two questions link very well together. And João, you wanted to reflect on that.
Yes, I want just to approach, to have a small approach on the issue by saying this. Whenever we find the roots of poverty on unequal distribution of wealth, either by income or by assets, we need to sometimes to add to that discrimination in different dimensions of discrimination, xenophobia, racism, other kinds of discriminations that affect some more vulnerable groups, and beyond some more vulnerable groups, some parts of the society. Women are not a social group. Women are the majority of the society, but they have specific discriminations affecting them. In specific discriminations that sometimes are one of the reasons that lead to poverty. Maybe this is more than acceptable synthesis of what I want to say, but to fight discrimination, we need to ensure universal rights. The only way to approach discrimination in an anti-poverty strategy in an effective way is to ensure the universal human rights as the common approach. One of the political issues we will have to deal with, it's with the discussion on not only criminalization of poverty, but on explaining poverty to poor people, saying other poor are to blame. That's what the far right is saying. The far right are saying to average people, you cannot find the house because the house goes to the gypsies, because the house goes to the migrants. This far right speech tends to split society and increase the conflict in society. We need to address that with the universal character of human rights. We need to ensure housing policies that addresses everyone's need of housing, taking into consideration those who are especially vulnerable, but not only to them, to everybody who needs housing. We need to address the access to social services with the universal need of access to social services, of course, taking into consideration the specific needs of those who are in a most vulnerable situation. The part of the draft report addressing these issues, it's one of the most, I believe, one of the most expandable from what is in the draft report. Because in what we have, considering this issue in the draft report, we can address all these specific issues, but taking into consideration the common ground we need to have of ensuring the universal character of human rights, because that's the way not only to break the cycle of poverty, but also to break the political speech that generates poverty and tries to divide society, not to solve poverty.
Yes, thank you very much, João. Marie, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry, I'm speaking not as speakers, but as just participant. But I had a question for Mr. Monte Oliveira. I will ask it in Spanish, so just to...
Thank you again for being here today. Could you please tell us what you expect from the EU? Which is your dream? What should we do? Well, I believe that the first job that the EU has is to keep the standard of living that it used to have. And it is very important to fight for the welfare state. We have fought for it for so many years. And this is the difference that the EU has. And this has to be taken into account. You also asked about politicians. I remember well what Jessica said, that it is important to make politicians understand that the social issue is a political issue. They need to understand and take this into account. And we also be aware of those politicians who don't believe in what we are doing, because there are many people who are against what we are doing. And they want to get rid of our fight to keep poverty.
No solamente para...
Yes, I think that we need to keep fighting to keep what we have and also to attain more, because there are minorities that are being affected, and we see, for instance, in my country, there is a discussion going on regarding menstrual products, because there are many girls who cannot go to school during that period during the month, and that is really important for them, because these items are so expensive that they cannot afford them, and so they have to stay out of school during those days of the month. And this is not fair. So I think that we will have to leave it here. Thank you to all of the participants. And to conclude, I would like to give the floor to Carlos Ucias, President of EAPN, so that he can give us his viewpoint on what has been discussed and also propose things to improve the report that João is working on. Because I think he has only 6,000 characters, but then, of course, we can send him all the comments, and because, of course, we can improve it and feed it. So we're open to your comments.
Unlimited, endless.
I know. I've learned.
If I can just add that the Commission communication is 15 pages.
Also a maximum.
Maximum 15 pages.
Well, thank you very much for all of you for all the interventions, and thank you for the EAPN team for the wonderful work. And Jacques Delors helped us to grow under his mandate. We had 3 mandates. The first is to take into account the voice of the persons living in poverty. Second, to have anti-poverty laws as key, and also to work on all the EU countries and to operate across EU countries. And we are operating also in candidate members countries, in member countries and candidate countries. So something that our director Julian referred to that is of the utmost importance. It's an ethical imperative to eradicate poverty, and it is also a matter of political and economic intelligence, because if we fighting against poverty is not a burden, it's an economic tool and a political tool. And then children are not born from the trees. Children are born within families. So if a family is poor, the child will be poor. And if the family is rich, the child won't be poor. So let us take this into account, because we need to analyze the interrelation between the family and the children. And when we talk about feminization of poverty, this is true, because women are worse off than men. And if we see single parent families, we see that we see economic poverty, child poverty, and care poverty. So everything is interrelated. This is why we need to come up with a poverty strategy, because all things are interrelated, and we need to see the entire picture. And we not only need to analyze what is already being done, but we also need to spot inconsistencies and come up with new measures, with new resources, and leave behind old measures that were not useful. There are people who believe that the European Commission or the EU does not have jurisdiction on poverty issues, and this is not true. They do have it. But there are no articles in the EU treaties saying that the EU will generate more poverty. However, many policies translate into more poverty. So we need to be consistent in our policies. We need consistency. Another example of interrelationship between homelessness, housing, and mental health. Well, there is a strict relationship among them. So we need a strategy. We need a consistent strategy. And the third thing is, in order to fight poverty, we have identified 6 pillars. The first is to guarantee an income to families. This is of the essence. This is tied to employment, but to a dignified employment with a decent salary. Otherwise, it doesn't work. We need enough pensions and also minimum income Minimum income schemes do not take people out of poverty, but they avoid the extreme suffering caused by poverty. And this is the reason why it is so important, because it enables elderly people and families to seek a better future for their families. Next, healthcare. In order to avoid from healthcare bankruptcy to translate into family bankruptcy. So we need healthcare for all citizens. We need a third pillar, which is the education, to avoid passing down poverty. Not all reach the education system in the same condition, but we need to have free and universal education. But we also take into account the background, because it's not the same to have someone who comes from a poor family and someone who comes from a well-off family. So we need to come up with protection policies, and the third sector plays a key role here. And the fourth pillar is housing. In the EU, housing is complex. We need to work on it. It's not just a market product. It is a human right, and we need to work towards guaranteeing housing. The fifth pillar is social services. They have been ravaged after the 2008 crisis. We need to recover and rebuild a social services system that will enable people to have preventive and palliative care. And the sixth pillar, and maybe the most important together with the first one, is economic and tax policies which guarantee social justice. If we want social justice, we need to have tax justice. So we need to work in this direction. And then there are some cross-cutting elements that were referred to before. First, gender. All measures need to have the gender, need to be take into account gender. The second measure that was referred to before, diversity and discrimination. This is of the essence. We are ever more diverse. There are people with disabilities, and across all poverty levels, persons with disability are worse off. We refer to the Roma community, and this is blatant. Sometimes this is hidden for legal reasons, and sometimes because they want to neglect it. But the problem is severe. And then we have the migrant community. They are here and they will stay here. So we need to give a response to those people who are here, who are producing, and they are working, and we need them. And then we have the environmental impact on poor families. Poor dwellings are more inefficient in energy. Heating the houses is more difficult and is less energy efficient. They have worse white goods, and the facilities, the utilities are more expensive for them. They cannot afford to pay the bills. Living in Europe is very expensive. We need to take into account the reality in the cities and in the rural environments. We need to talk about digital immersion. People need to be included in the digital world, because we digitalize institutions, citizens, but what about those on the verge of social exclusion? We're excluding them even more. And then participation. This is essential. These cross-cutting elements need to be present across all 6 pillars. And with participation, it's not just this beautiful message to invite someone to dinner on Christmas Eve. Participation is not about that. Participation needs broad processes, economic support, so that people will not only talk about their reality, they will talk about common issues. So they need to get together to debate. We need to provide technical and economic support. And this is really important. So, ladies and gentlemen from the Intergroup, you have a lot of work ahead. We will be supporting because the responsibility lies with the public. The responsibility lies with the EU, with the municipalities, with the countries, the third sector, social entities. We support, we encourage, we do whatever we can, but we also need your support and your help. And lately, we're getting little support. So thank you very much for this event. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think that was a very comprehensive overview of also priorities and needs that we have. And with that, we conclude this, I think, very informative and good session that we had today. We still have a lot of work to do. João already had to leave, but I think we have this opportunity to, once his report has been produced, to to amplify it and to make sure that all these elements that we have discussed today are also in the report. And we need your help for that, so thank you very much. And for now, there's still the opportunity to have a glass of water or maybe a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and chat a little bit. Again, thank you very much for being here. Also, thank you very much for those that were listening online. We are not finishing. I really like the Spanish expression, la lucha continua. Yes, thank you very much.